And so the question for me was not, or the journey for me wasn't about finding the gospel. It was about embracing the gospel. And so throughout childhood, that was kind of, I went through ebbs and flows of like, do I really want to embrace this? Here it is. I'm exposed to it all the time. It's right in front of me. And some seasons were hysterical rebellion against that. Some seasons were closer to an embrace. But it was really when I met some people that just had a beautiful walk with the Lord in high school that it became compelling and real and tangible for me. So we started walking together and gained a mentor through that journey who was able to help me process some of these things and then continued on through college. But yeah, for me, it was less of a, I've never been exposed to this. Here it is. Do you embrace it? It was here's kind of the painting on the wall, and it's going to stay on the wall. And God willing, you're going to learn to see it as beautiful. And thankfully, the Lord called me to have eyes that saw that as beautiful. So,
yeah, that's awesome. I feel like resonate with that a lot. Craig has played a pretty large role in my life as well, growing up, and just kind of taking me under his wing when I was in high school and things. So you guys have been up in Canmore in Alberta, which is north of Montana. For those of you that aren't up on your Canadian geography, north of Montana. You guys have been up there for about 2.5 years now, and kind of tell us a little bit about Canmore and just the journey of being sent to Canmore. How did all that come about?
Yeah, so Canmore is a town of about 15,000 people. We're an hour west of Calgary, so like Christian said, it's kind of where Idaho kind of sticks up and has like a little point. If you just go straight north of that for 4 or 5 hours, you would get to our place. It's a mountain town. Are there some pictures, I think? Yeah, so this is our town. I do have a sign-up sheet to come on our church planning team. No, I try to put this picture in front of so many people. Nobody seems to bite. I don't understand it, but maybe it's myself.
It's cold.
Like, it's the presenter. That's the issue.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, so this is our town. It's lovely. It's awesome. It's beautiful. Canmore is, it's a tourist community. I mean, that's kind of like what we both embrace and hate about our town. We have a lot of people that come in. But here's part of the beauty. Much like a university that attracts people from all walks of life, all places in the world, Canmore does that. So you go into a coffee shop, you are not going to hear a Canadian speaking to you. It's going to be somebody else. Canada is like was part of the Commonwealth of the United Kingdom, so they have partnerships with all these countries around the world that people can come and have a working holiday visa for a year or two. And so you come to our little valley, and I mean, literally the world comes there, whether to live and work for a season of life or to experience the beauty for a week or on vacation or whatnot. And so we felt like, man, this is a cool place to do ministry because we have the opportunity to walk with people for a season, however long that might be, and then we're like this little embassy of light in this valley, and we're gonna like start shooting emissaries around the world, and even as a church plant of like literally like 10 to 15 people, 2.5 years in, we have people all over the globe now who have come and been a part of our story, and we've been a part of theirs, and they've been able to go and plant in a new place, somewhere we might not ever touch ground on, and they're our little gospel emissary. So it's cool. It's a cool culture of like coming, experiencing life in the Bow Valley, which is like our broader area, and then dispersing. That's attractive to us. It's also one of the hard things about where we live, and I'm sure most of you in a university setting can identify with that. You build friendships, you build trust and community, and then those things kind of, for no fault of anyone, just kind of disappear. So, but Canmore was a place that had our people, and I don't want to get too much into that yet, because I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. But my wife's Canadian, so it made sense. I mean, you know.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. I mean, it is one of the most beautiful places that I've ever been. There's like 4 national parks that kind of all lean up against one another right next to their town. And so it's a pretty awesome place.
Yeah.
So in the midst of like this whole process of the Lord leading you guys up to Canmore, what kinds of things were you wrestling with? Like, what kinds of things were going through your mind in the midst of making that decision, in the midst of getting ready to head up there? What kinds of things were just running through your head?
Yeah. Are we making a grave mistake? That was one of the things running through my head. Immigration's really hard. It was really difficult season of life when we were living in Radford and trying to prepare to move to Canada. So just like a lot of frustration, it felt like, gosh, like we feel this very clear call to this place and our work there, and yet it doesn't feel like I felt like, maybe one of the assumptions we make about calling is like once we find the answer, the dominoes fall pretty easily, and it just never felt like that for us. So there's a lot of like just effort to like push through and get to where we wanted to be. I don't know why we make that assumption. That's not the story we get from God. But anyway, that was one of the things. Who's going to go with us? Like that was a question. We knew a few people in town. We knew a few people on the Canadian side of the border that wanted to come and be a part of our team. But even from here, like, is anybody going to like make the journey with us? There's a lot of obstacles in the way, like as hard as it was, Zoe and I had it easy in the fact I was married to a Canadian. So, but actually a guy from Virginia Tech came that I discipled while we were living here, and he's still up there. He's been there 2 years working on his permanent residency in Canada. So there were a lot of just like, man, who are we going to do this with? We had really great community at the church we were at in Radford, and felt a lot of fear in leaving that, pressing into an unknown season. It's kind of like, man, like it's really good now. It's really rich. It wouldn't be hard to stay, and yet there was a sense of like, no, but like this is the next part of our story, and so. But yeah, there was a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety around going.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can probably all really relate to that in some sense, in terms of like, even with our engaged groups, there's this sense of like, what we have here is good. What we have here in NLCF as a whole is good, and it can be scary then to even venture out into our classes, into clubs, into workplaces, in this sent nature. Even when we feel like a very clear call, this is a person that the Lord has put in my life, it feels like, well, things are good here. And what is it going to look like when we venture out? Are the dominoes going to fall? Yeah, jump.
Or on the flip side, once you go and like once you take the step into the sending, almost this Israelite mentality when they're in the wilderness, looking back, going like, this is really hard. We did have food in Egypt, like, and sometimes we struggle with that. Like we're in Canmore and life gets really hard and you don't feel like you're like seeing the fruit and the evidence of God at work. And you're like looking back at Radford going like, man, life was pretty good there, Yeah. And yeah, with calling and sending, there's a sense of like, man, there's so much emotion wrapped into it, good and bad, healthy and unhealthy, and yet God is inviting us to continue the story, not just be content in like one particular chapter where he has done something great, he's formed us in some miraculous way, and yet he wants to continue to form us. And that's one of the things we've had to press into as we've struggled with some of that is like God is still at work. He's still writing Zoe and I's story. He's still writing the Cairn, which is our church, its story. And we just need to be more okay with like seeing the script play out as we're faithful and not really knowing what the end's going to look like.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely feel that. I think there are times where it feels like, this is clearly someone or some place or something that the Lord has put in my life to pursue, to go after. And yet, it feels like I'm banging my head against the wall. And it is easy to look back and say, oh, man, things were good in Egypt. Really what I took away from that is that Radford equals Egypt.
Yep.
So, but, that's good. No, yep. So kind of as you guys have been up there for the last 2.5 years, what's been hard? What are some of the things that you've kind of come up against getting settled into Canmore, getting things going with the Cairn, and what are some things you kind of had to wrestle with, both on a personal level and even as a church?
Yeah. So before I venture into that answer, I feel like I should explain our name because most people probably are like, who is the lead team that decided on that name, So does anybody know what a Cairn is? Okay, like just shout it out if you know what it is.
Stack of rock.
Yeah, it's a stack of rock. Have you already told them what our
No.
name? Okay, I just wanted to make sure I wasn't repeating you. So yeah, you've probably seen it on Instagram or some travel blog or whatever, and you see it a lot, and they're stacked really neatly, and somebody's taken like 30 minutes to get the right Instagram shot of it, and but in the Rocky Mountains, it's really hard, really essential for navigation. So you can see, this is our dog park, by the way. I just want to brag on our dog park.
Casual.
So when you get above tree line and you're on this just huge section of rocks and it's not really easy to discern where you go, that's what a cairn is for. So somebody before you has set this up and you can kind of scan the horizon. Oh, there's a cairn over there, and you walk to it and do that process over and over in order to find the right way. And so for us as a church, we want to be a marker along the way for sojourners in our valley to see that the path of Jesus is the path to life. And so that's why we call ourselves the Cairn. And actually, Christian and Meg were there the week that we decided on that name, which is like a cool connection. But yeah, I just felt like that probably that has a little bit of our vision within it. And we're not weird. I promise, we're not weird. We're just Canadian.
Yeah.
Anyway, back to your question.
Yeah.
I just felt like I probably needed to explain that. What's been hard? The overarching answer to this question, both on a family level for Zoe and I and a church level, has been loneliness. Like I said, we had great community before we left to go to Canmore. And yeah, for our church, for our team, for us as a family, man, it's really hard to bring people in, especially when you're a small group of people and you're like, oh, I don't know how many couples have come into our church, and Zoe and I have been like, this is the one. Like, they are going to be our friends, and we're going to love living life with them. And we'll catch them on, like, the last 4 months of their visa before they have to move, And you're like, are you serious? Last spring we started a supper club, which we had in Radford with a couple couples, and so we kind of arranged it the same way. Literally the first supper club, we had 3 other couples in our house, one of which announced at the first supper club, yeah, we're moving in 2 weeks, and then the other 2 have, from April until now, have already moved away, and so we're like, I guess we're resetting supper club with more people. It just feels like that is just a constant, it's just like a cumulative effect of grief over the months when you see people near and dear and formative in your life. And now we have a daughter who, like, they're becoming little aunties and uncles for Blythe, and they're leaving. And, yeah, that becomes a hard way to live. And so we're trusting God, like, who do you have? Like, we don't know what the answer is going to be, like, to have, like, deep and profound friendships here. And our church feels the same way. Like, as a church, we'll go through periods of swelling where it's like, oh man, like God's at work, and then it just feels like, boom, like the vat's empty. That happened to us this summer, where we lost a significant portion of our church, not for any bad reasons, just for the nature of life kind of taking over. And so that's been really hard. Not just the relationship portion, but loneliness also takes effect in our souls when we feel lonely in the task. There's been times, me alone and with Zoe, where we'll be walking through town and just being like, man, are we the only people that care about this? And I know that's not true, but there's periods where you feel that, especially when relationships are revolving a lot. So, yeah, that's overwhelmingly been the hardest part.
Yeah. I think that definitely makes sense, and it makes me think about someone like Joseph in the scriptures, like what it must have been like to be in this place where he knows no one. He's culturally different than everyone else in Egypt. He's a slave. I mean, how isolating that must have been. And then things start to build for him, and then it's all gone again. And then things start to build for him in the prison, and it's gone again. And just that kind of cyclical nature of that. I think, this is one of the reasons that we, are both we're both very thankful for and leaning into this blessing that we have as a community here, that we need one another. When we go out, when we're sent, we don't go alone. We go with one another. This is meant to be a shared task. And so, I think that it's something that even as we're here, it's a chance for us to say, thank you, Lord, that you've given us this. And to be looking around us and saying, like, who's journeying along this similar path, but doing so by themselves, while all the while we know the blessing of our family here. So that's some tough stuff. So in the midst of wrestling with that and all the various things that you guys have been faced with over the last 2.5 years, what are some things that kind of keep you going? Like, what are some truths or some practices that you regularly come back to in order to just say, I know this is hard. The Lord sees that it's hard. How are we going to keep moving forward?
Yeah. So even before we moved, we took a vision trip the summer before we moved to Canmore, and there's this passage in 1 Corinthians 3 that just for some reason God brought to my attention, and it's where Paul is telling the Corinthian church, like, who am I? Who is Apollos? Like, one person planted a seed, another person watered, but God gives the growth. And later on in that paragraph, he says, we actually join God in his work. We become his fellow worker. And from the very beginning of kind of our journey about Canmore and in Canmore, that passage has always been kind of our anchor, so to speak, where we can go back and say, like, at the end of the day, we're in Canmore as the stewards of God's work here. Like, the gospel proclamation, kingdom imagination and work, like, that didn't start when we arrived to plant the cairn. God's been doing that since, the late 1800s when the railroad came through and formed this town. And for this season, however long God's going to have us there and have the cairn be a part of Canmore's story, like, we're to be good stewards of what he's already been at work doing and what he's going to continue way after Zoe and I are gone. We have a big river running through our town called the Bow River, and it's gorgeous, and we talk about that river a lot. Like, the water coming through Canmore, like, started way back on the Bow Glacier, like high up in the mountains west of us, and it passes through us, and it's never the same water. It's always different, and yet we can be in this particular place in time and watch this water, this current run past. And we think a lot about that in Canmore as times are hard, or we're enjoying times of blessing. Like, man, we are in this fixed point of history here in this town, and we get to see the current of God's Spirit move in Canmore. We get to steward those things and cultivate where we see it, and kind of hop into the current of that. And one day it's going to go, flow past us, and we're no longer going to be a part of, at least Zoe and I will no longer be a part of Canmore's story, and yet God will his current's still going to be moving, just as the Bow River is always going to be flowing through that place. So that's one of the truths we've tried to hang on to, in seasons of blessing or hardship, of like, man, God, you're at work, and I just have to believe that at the end of the day, like, even when I don't see it, you're working, and I get to till soil, and sometimes I'm going to be a waterer or a planter, especially for like our lost friends and neighbors who leave without ever, following Jesus. It's like, man, at the end of the day, I gotta believe, I gotta trust that this seed that was planted through the cairn will be nurtured and cared for by God through someone else in a different place. And that brings a lot of rest, honestly. Like, it just alleviates this idea of like, I have to till this garden from compacted soil to this beautiful flowering. I know you guys have used the image of the mustard seed and this like bush that creates flourishing. Like, at the end of the day, I just can't do that. And it's good to know I get to be a part of this and to flow in the stream of God's Spirit, and yet I just am a part of it. I'm his fellow worker. He's the guy doing the work. So yeah. That's been like the go-to idea for Zoe and I.
Yeah. I think in that, I feel like even hearing you say that, like, I recognize that that's true, and yet my thought is like, well, but what does it mean for me? Like, what does that mean for me in this season? Like, I don't want to just till the ground over and over and over again. But there is that liberation in knowing that, like, this isn't about me. Like, the Lord has this. He's moving far beyond what I can see. Yeah. And it's liberating to know that.
One of the cool things, too, is when you're just faithful in that task of joining God in his work, you get connected to people who have a much broader understanding of the story of Canmore than I do. I've been there 2.5 years. For people in Canmore, that seems like a long time. Like, I've outlasted a lot of people there already. And yet, there's people in our valley who have a